when you see what has happened with HP's warnings on coronavirus during its call, Microsoft last night similarly warning on the outlook. We're expecting to hear from Dell in just a few hours. What do you think?
Well, I think it's prudent and I think it's predictable, honestly. I mean, these are all companies with hugely concentrated supply chains in Asia in general and China in particular, so I don't find it surprising. And I think we don't know what we don't know, obviously, but I think they're being prudent and I don't think we should be surprised.
What is the information, the data, when you're in the CEO seat right now, trying to give investors as much good information as you can, of course, trying to keep your people safe at the same time and deliver products of high quality? What's the data that you're looking for out of the base of your supply chain at a time like this?
Well, let me say first, in terms of keeping employees safe, now would be a time for all companies, no matter what their size, to review their emergency preparedness plans. I know that sounds so basic, but actually when I arrived at HP, we didn't have them. And an emergency preparedness or emergency response plans include things, for example, like, do you actually know where all your employees are working at any given time? And can you contact them quickly when you need to? Do you have evacuation plans in place for every single location? Do you have emergency response teams in place? And do employees know who they are? Can you communicate broadly with your employees? And I do think it's important to recognize that employees are going to look to their own companies for much of the information about what is really going on. In some cases, the information out of governments may be suspect. And so companies have to take it on themselves to inform their employees and make sure that they have the plans in place to keep their employees out of harm's way. We're reminded of this as well last night with this terrible tragedy at Molson Coors. With regard to the information that you're trying to pass on to investors, I would just say that now is also perhaps a time for companies to evaluate their supply chains and how concentrated and consolidated they are. I'm not suggesting that coronavirus should change your supply chain plans totally, but I do think there's always a trade-off between a supply chain that is consolidated either regionally or by partner and one that is diversified. And reviewing that balance again at this point, I think, is prudent. And finally, I think the best you can do is to tell investors what you actually know. Don't speculate. But I think, as I indicated before, I think at this point, most of us would say common sense suggests there are going to be surprises here, if any, on the downside, not on the upside.
You mentioned supply chains, Carly. I mean, what does diversification mean when you're not talking about borders and governments and tariffs? You're talking about a virus that travels easily.
Yes, well, that is, of course, part of the issue here. But for example, many companies have a consolidated supply chain to not just a single city or a single region, but to a single partner. And so this would be a time to say, do we have too many eggs in one basket when something unexpected and unforeseen happens? There's no question that a virus skips over borders. There's also no question that the locus of this virus was in China, is in China, and affected particular parts of the supply chain more deeply there than anywhere else. And so, again, I'm not suggesting that supply chain plans should change because of coronavirus. I am suggesting that this is a reminder to always be looking at supply chain planning and trying to assess that balance between the benefits of consolidation, and there are real benefits, and the security, perhaps, or the lowering of risk in the diversification of a supply chain.
Carly, how much and how long, if you're a CEO, C-suite executive, do you decide to curtail travel, even domestic travel, at a time like this, not just to conferences, but also to go meet with customers? Do you do that now? Do you set in place very specific criteria under which you do that? And what would those criteria be?
Yeah, I think that's a really hard call. I'm certainly not an expert, and I don't necessarily have the benefit of all the information that's available. But I would say that curtailing domestic travel at this point strikes me as an overreaction. I do think that if there are large gatherings of employees that have not yet been announced or have not yet been planned, that you might postpone those, if only because employees are nervous about it. But I don't think there's any indication at this point that air travel or train travel in the United States is particularly more dangerous than it was a month ago when we didn't know about the coronavirus.
So as an individual
I say that as someone
right
who
now,
gets on an airplane a lot, however.
That's what I was about to say. Are you curtailing your own travel, even domestically, at all, given the concerns out there?
No, I'm not. I just got off a plane yesterday. I get on a plane again in a couple days, so I don't feel particularly any more at risk. And of course, look, there are germs in airplanes, so people need to be prudent about all the things the doctors tell us to do. Wash your hands, don't touch your face. All of those things are good cautionary notes that we should be reminded of.
Finally, we do always love to ask you about politics, Carly, because you did run for president. One argument that's been made by the president and some others, too, is that the stock market's decline is based not just on the fears of the virus, but the effect it would have on the economy and, by extension, the effect it would have on the president's ability to get reelected. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I don't know, frankly. I mean, stock markets move in mysterious ways sometimes because they're driven in the short term by more emotion than perhaps we'd like to admit. But I think generally speaking, this massive sell-off in a relatively short period of time is not about politics. It's all about the coronavirus, and it's all about the unknowns of this virus. Now, having said that, apart from the coronavirus, we were getting news that says maybe things in the global economy aren't quite as strong as we thought. I mean, growth in China was slowing long before this virus. Manufacturing output is down in this country. European economies are slowing. So there were cautionary notes before all of this news on the coronavirus. But I think the lack of information and the unpredictability of the effects of this virus really are what's spooking the market this week.